Hello, my name is Maliha Safri, and I'm an associate editor and a member of the editorial board of Rethinking Marxism, and I'm here to introduce our inaugural lecture, our inaugural Julie Graham Memorial Lecture. Before we get started, I just have a couple of things that I was asked to do. One thing is this conference is sponsored, of course, by Rethinking Marxism. So I wanted to take just a moment to encourage all of you to think about taking those presentations, all of those papers that you all have been working on, and think about submitting them to the journal. That would, if you have any questions about doing that or about the submission process, please grab any one of the many editorial board members that you see floating around. There's four right here. There's Kenna. There's Peter Ives over there in the corner. There's lots of people. So please grab us at any point during the conference and talk to us. And we would love to see these papers make their way into the pages of the journal. And we will work with you to make that happen. One other thing that I'd like to just briefly talk about is that this is a very important year for our journal, for Rethinking Marxism. We are seeing an editorial transition between S. Charushila, who actually couldn't be here with us tonight because she had a family emergency, but she has been our chief editor since 2010. And this year she stepped down, she in her 4 years, she really helped shepherd the journal through a lot of important internal transformations, such as helping create the change to web-based submissions and creating a structure that trained and brought on associate editors for the first time. So we'd just like to take a moment to thank her for all of her incredible work, for being the chief editor. And I'd also like to thank our incoming editors. Serap Kayatkin, where are you? Maybe we could, sorry, hey, okay, there you are. And Marcus Green, where are you? Okay, sorry. Despite a very tumultuous summer for the both of them, Serap moving to a new job in Izmir and Marcus becoming a first-time father, this summer they also saw us, they also became co-editors of the journal. And this has been a very smooth transition. And I can say from a sort of insider's position that they're doing this job so well that it seems like they've been doing it for years. And I don't know what's in store for the journal, but I'm very confident that they are the right partnership to guide us through the next 4 years, and maybe more. So, yeah. We are very lucky to have with us tonight Katherine Gibson, one half of the J.K. Gibson Graham that changed the conversations within the Association for Economic and Social Analysis, as well as Rethinking Marxism, as well as many other arenas, for sure, within economic geography, human geography. She is here tonight to present the inaugural Julie Graham Memorial Lecture. Maybe I'll just take one brief moment. The first time I met Julie was, I was a research assistant helping organize a conference at UMass, and it was in this building, well, actually, sorry, the other building, and there was this party going on, and I walk in, it was at the end of the conference, and here was this very striking, tall, red-headed woman who was dancing like no one was watching, really. I remember thinking, wow, this is going to be a very different type of professor than I have ever met before. And that was certainly the case. many of us who came in contact with her, if you knew her personally, you know how she called her students, but pretty much everyone, sweetie, honey, sweetheart, even when she was telling us something we might not want to hear. For my part, I remember her coming to dinner parties and really being the life of the party. She was uncommon in many respects, but her intellectual life and unique theoretical contributions demand attention. That is what we wish to celebrate here tonight. Let me just say a few words about the work of J.K. Gibson Graham. Reading The End of Capitalism as We Knew It, a feminist critique of political economy, transformed my understanding of both class analysis and feminism. This came soon on the heels of having experienced, and I do think that that's the appropriate word for that word, for both that book and Knowledge in Class, because to read both of those books wasn't just to read, but to experience the world differently. I remembered speaking with Jaren, actually. I was about halfway, well, she had started the book before me, and so she was a little bit ahead of me in the book. And at some point I just had to talk to someone else who had read this book. And we both totally geeked out and admitted that we had started sleeping with this book under our pillow. And the copy of the book that I actually have was Yaya's, one that I borrowed and never returned, and kindly he let me steal that from him. To read The End of Capitalism was to suddenly create a shift in the ground, to allow for economic difference as a simultaneous ontological condition rather than a historical trend of stagism. Through a variety of participatory or community action research projects, they explored the effects of different representations in terms of how they open up economic possibilities inside real communities. Bringing together local community members, workers, academics, and other local professionals, Gibson Graham undertook such projects, these participatory action research projects, in Western Massachusetts, Australia's Latrobe Valley, the Bohol province in the Philippines, and gave generously of themselves to countless other projects all over the world seeking to replicate their methodology. Including a participatory action research project that I organized in New Jersey. They are very generous. All you have to do is ask them, and they will give of themselves. They have contributed to the formation and life of institutions such as Unlad Kabayan, which formed a savings group that seeks to invest in non-capitalist firms in the Philippines. They have had close collaborations with community organizations such as Nuestras Raíces in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and with many worker cooperatives such as Collective Copies right here in Amherst. Julie and Kath never saw scholarship as an extractive industry, and in fact trained generations of students to think about the ethical dimensions and obligations of scholarship. Quite simply, Julie and Kath were and are organic intellectuals, and their theoretical work has and continues to provide inspiration. Since Julie's death, Kath Gibson has been continuing and expanding the work that she and Julie shared. Tonight she's going to actually give a lecture that is part of a symposium edited by Esra Erdem over there, which is a wonderful symposium that's going to be coming out in 2 issues, this and the subsequent issue of RM. And the symposium is full of contributions from students of Julie's and collaborators. So I urge you all to see that work, especially because Julie is probably going to be referring to some of it in her talk tonight. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Big slip there, so very sorry. Kath is currently professor at the Institute of Culture and Society at the University of Western Sydney. She has also played a major organizing role in the formation of the Community Economies Collective, a network of researchers across the US, Europe, Asia, and Australia. And she's really sort of helped maintained that collective in the wake of Julie's death, and reached out to many of her students who, you know, were quite frankly pretty lost after her death. Most recently, she organized a 2-week writing seminar that brought together researchers from the Community Economies Collective at different stages of their career, and helped sort of guide all of that unruly collective. Not a week has gone by without an invitation for a major lecture from journals, universities, all around the world. So we are very fortunate that she has agreed to join us here tonight. Please welcome Katherine Gibson.
Thanks, Maria. So just tell me if this is the right sound. Well, hi everybody. It's both a very sad and an appropriately celebratory kind of occasion to be asked to be giving this inaugural Julie Graham Memorial Lecture. And I think it's probably even sadder to think that it follows last night's inaugural memorial lecture for Steve Resnick. So we've lost 2 wonderful souls in the last few years. I just wanted to acknowledge that. So first, I want to express my heartfelt thanks to the organising committee for inviting me to do this. Giving a plenary at a Rethinking Marxism conference, gala conference as you call them here, is a great honour, and to me it's a big deal. And my mind casts back to the previous 2 such plenaries that were given by J.K. Gibson Graham. The first one in 1992, I think at the first gala, and the other in 2000. 21 years ago, in 1992, it was Julie who was up at the podium, alongside Ernest Mandel, Emmanuel Wallerstein and Nancy Fraser. And to a largely aghast audience, she announced that we were done with waiting for the revolution and had embarked on a project of smashing capitalism while working at home in our spare time. Well, while Julie valiantly rehearsed the central argument of what was to become a few years later our first book, The End of Capitalism as We Knew It, a feminist critique of political economy, all the stress of holding up a mirror to radical economic analysis and identifying the debilitating political effects of its capitalocentrism as we saw it, was concentrated in her mute collaborator. I remember sitting somewhere here in this audience, unable to breathe, my stomach in a knot, with a splitting headache. In 2000, it was totally a different event. It was a much more pleasurable one for both of us. Together, we presented our vision of class enchantment, using clips from the British films The Full Monty and Brassed Off, to illustrate different forms of economic subjectivity. And to the refrain of Tom Jones singing I Believe in Miracles, we offered glimpses of a post-capitalist politics for building community economies, foreshadowing our next book, A Post-Capitalist Politics, which was published in 2006. So tonight, in this third appearance, we return to a single speaker representing the collaboration that was and still is J.K. Gibson Graham. And I trust that Julie's spirit is lurking around somewhere here, hopefully not with its stomach in a knot, as I reflect on where our thinking and research on politics has moved since the mid-2000s. And this time I'll be drawing on our latest book, Take Back the Economy, an ethical guide for transforming our communities, which just came out earlier this year, published by University of Minnesota Press. And this book was conceptualised and begun with Julie before she died in 2010, and it's co-authored with our very dear friends and ex-students, Stephen Healy, who's here somewhere, and Jenny Cameron from Australia. So it's a popular book designed to elicit discussion around ethical interdependence and to provoke conscious and combined efforts to build a new kind of economic reality. So I have a picture here and of Julie, and I'll just get my tissue, David's handkerchief out. And I know I'm a little bit wobbly, so if I really sort of end up in a heap, I just want you all to start singing I Believe in Miracles. Give me a moment to compose myself. Yeah, I have a picture here of Julie for company, and she's at the Cape at her very favourite camping ground run by the Audubon Society. And yes, as she often was, she's on the telephone, connecting with someone in her huge network of friends and colleagues. The telephone was a key player in Julie's life, a technology that was totally part of her, unlike email, which she kind of felt dominated by and railed against. Well, with Julie living in Shutesbury and me in various parts of Australia for the duration of our 33-year friendship, the telephone was certainly an enabler of our joint authorial persona, J.K. Gibson Graham. And it was when international phone calls drastically improved in quality and fell in price with the liberalisation of the telecommunications industry and advances in satellite technology that our collaboration was able to become a weekly and sometimes daily performance. And I think it was the embodied practice of this connection that partly, I'm sure, led to our productivity from the 1990s onwards. So this photo is taken in the Audubon Society's campground with forest all around and the calls of birds in the air, and it reminds me of Julie's great love of nature in all its forms, but especially birds, and particularly the hummies, as she liked to call them, the minuscule ruby-throated hummingbirds that visited the feeders outside her kitchen and bedroom windows every summer on their epic journey from Central America to the northeast of the US. On my visits during the Australian winter and the Massachusetts summer, Julie and I loved to sit with our early morning cups of tea and observe the relentless competition for sweet nectar taking place outside the window screen. Silly young hummies with no thought to predators dallying over the feeder, and then skittish older hummies dive-bombing whoever was at the trough, then hardly taking a slurp before, ever vigilant, they kept on the move. Julie's feeling for these creatures was emotional and deep, and the grief that she expressed when the topic of climate change and species extinction came up was palpable. In the last years of her life, Julie and I became more concerned about how to act in our climate-changing world, the age of the Anthropocene, when global warming and species extinction presents threats to life as we've known it, both on our planet and in our economies. Over the 30 or so years of our collaboration, we often return to the question, how do researchers participate in collective actions that will bring other worlds into being? And much of our work has been aimed at opening up ideas about what action is, both by broadening what's considered action under the influence of feminist political imaginaries and strategies, and by refusing the old separation between theory and action. But the coming of the Anthropocene forced us to think more openly about what is the collective that acts. Could we see the telephone and the hummingbirds as part of that collective? And if so, what would it mean for a politics aimed at bringing other worlds into being? To displace humans from the centre of action and to add more than human elements and beings into the collective that acts is certainly a revolutionary move. So in this lecture, I want to think around these kind of matters, and so with a playful nod to that 1992 lecture, I've entitled the presentation, Being the Revolution, or How to Live in a More Than Capitalist World Threatened with Extinction. Of course, while working at home in your spare time. And I'm going to enrol various collaborators in this thinking, and some of them are authors of the special collection that's coming out in the Rethinking Marxism journal that's dedicated to Julie. And others are the authors and the editors of a new book that's coming out called Performing Diverse Economies, that's edited by Kevin St. Martin, who's over there, and Gerda Rolvink from Australia, and J.K. Gibson Graham. So with the telephone and the hummingbirds as my inhuman and non-human guides, I'll attempt to make connections across space, across species, across disparate and unfamiliar concerns. The lecture proceeds with sections discussing the elements and limits of a feminist imaginary of possibility, the synergies between a politics of building community economies and the political imaginary of actor network theory, or what's often called material semiotics. And thirdly, the materiality of emerging community economy assemblages. But I want to start with a story of another camper who has employed technology as a radical actant in search of life, in service of life. Jonathan Moylan, or Jono as he's called, is a 25-year-old translator who grew up in Newcastle, New South Wales, which is the world's largest coal port a few hours north of Sydney. He's a member of Frontline Action on Coal, an activist group who has set up the first blockade camp of a coal mine in Australia's history. And they're opposing the expansion of open-cut coal mining in the Maules Creek at the Laird State Forest. This is the biggest remnant forest of natural bushland left on the rich Liverpool Plains, part of the state of New South Wales food bowl. In January this year, the protest camp had occupied the bushland site for just over 5 months. And on Monday, January the 7th, Jonathan, sitting in his bushland camp office, used his laptop and mobile phone to issue a fake media release that temporarily wiped out more than $314 million from the value of Whitehaven Coal, a company that plans to extend its mine and clear half of the remaining Laird Forest. The media release announced that the ANZ Bank, which is one of our major investment and consumer banks, had reversed a decision to provide a $1.2 billion loan to Whitehaven Coal to develop the mine. So using a real ANZ statement as a template, a website, and a dummy ANZ email address that he bought for $25 on the internet, Jonathan's media release sparked a sudden shareholder sell-off when it was emailed to journalists around midday. When one newspaper contacted him, Mr. Moylan, as it reported, initially posed as a corporate affairs spokesman for the ANZ Bank. Whitehaven's coal share price dropped by 8%, and it was put into a trading halt. When it was reported the next day in the national press, the story was headed, "Rogue Trader, Hoax Triggers $314 Million Fall." The headline was soon modified to "Environmentalists' Hoax Triggers $314 Million Fall," in a kind of strategic relocation of the actor out of the trading pen and over into the mad externality land of environmentalists. The journalists, of course, focused on Jono the individual, and indeed it's he alone who is being charged and taken to court and potentially faces a 10-year prison sentence for making a false and misleading statement under the Corporations Act. But Jono is part of a much wider hybrid collective that acted on and around January the 17th. His action was inspired, of course, by the Yes Men in the US and also Australia's The Chaser team. And it was part of a coordinated set of protests outside of the ANZ banks all around Australia at that time. In a statement issued to explain why he took such a risk, Jono makes it clear that he's acting in concert with Maules Creek farmers, who have shown a great deal of courage in their attempts to prevent the biggest expansion of the coal industry in New South Wales, as he wrote. All over Australia, and I know in the US and I suspect all over the world, such kind of conservative middle-aged farmers are increasingly joining with more radical green activists across the barriers of demographic and ideological alterity to oppose destruction of farm livelihoods by coal and coal gas seam expansion. But Jono was also acting in friendship with the non-human, defending productive farmland, which is part of Australia's food bowl, protecting other species, especially the grassy box woodland of the Laird Forest, and the koalas who inhabit it. And speaking for the aquifer, which is threatened with contamination, and at the end of mining in 21 years will, according to the company's calculations, be drawn down into a pit lake that will drain the water table for 1,000 years. He's most definitely acting in concert with future generations. As he wrote in his statement in the news that was published in the newspaper, the Iroquois people of North America survived by asking how people 7 generations ahead would be affected by their actions. But here, hundreds of generations will be affected. Beyond these immediate and future collaborators, Jonathan Moylan's action took effect thanks to a much wider socio-technical assemblage that offered a felicitous set of circumstances. His media release was what Judith Butler calls a perlocutionary performative. And she writes, the perlocution implies risk, wager, and the possibility of having an effect, but without any strong probability or strong notion of probability or any possible version of necessity. What acted with Jono were hypervigilant share traders in a nation where over half the adult population owned shares either directly or through managed funds, a media in which the vagaries of financial markets are the bulk of daily reporting, a photocopier that could transfer a corporate letterhead onto a fake press release, wireless internet connections to a remote bushland campsite, laptop technologies, and a national economy that is skewed towards resource extraction and riding high on the massive export markets for Australian coal in China, Japan and India.